This man was in complete shock when he discovered a dark and creepy cave hidden away on his property. He was scared to enter it, but decided to do so anyway. But pretty soon, he would realize that he made a big mistake. And it all started with a simple cleanup of his shed. Man finds hidden cave on property, realizes something is wrong when he enters. The shed had not been visited by John in many years. It lay on the edge of his property against the shadow of a mountain. But as John entered the shed, he noticed something strange. Between all the large equipment, he found some ripped open food wrappings. Little did he know that these packages would change his life forever. The old shed was filled to the brim with large farming equipment. Lawnmowers, shovels, and cabinets were just rotting away. Today it was time for all of the junk to go away. But after moving stuff around for about 15 minutes, John spots the edge of a door frame behind one of the cabinets. "I haven't been here often, so I never noticed that all the junk was secretly blocking a hidden door," John later said. His curiosity was piqued, and John immediately started to remove all the large objects blocking the doorway. Once clear, John grabbed the doorknob and pulled. And with a loud creak, it opened up. As the door opened up, John couldn't believe his eyes. Behind this seemingly normal doorway lay a large cave. It seemed that the shed was built right into the mountain wall and was just a cover-up for a secret entrance into its dark hidden mysteries. What the hell is all of this? Where does this go? Because the finding of a cave behind the shed was just the start. When John turned his gaze to the right, he saw that the cave had extended into a dark tunnel. It seemed to run deep inside the mountain itself. John was in shock. What is this? Where does this go? And why is it here? John couldn't believe that this mysterious cave had been on his property for years and he never noticed. He was eager to find out where it led. He grabbed his phone and turned on his flashlight to get his bearings in the pitch-black tunnel. Carefully, he made his way through the watery grounds. The tunnel was vast, and it seemed to dampen all sound. The eerie silence of the place kind of scared him a bit, so he tried to break it by calling out, "Hello? Hello?" His calling out was met with no response. At least not at first, because after about a minute, John heard a loud noise. The first thumping noise was immediately followed up by a second one. The loud bangs made John almost leap into the air out of fright. John felt like this was not just a coincidental thump. The hairs on the back of his neck were standing up, and sweat broke out on his face. His first response was to head back immediately. He had to get out of there. So he ran towards the door, making his way back into the old shed. He closed the door behind him and tried to catch his breath. Did he make a huge mistake coming here? At that moment, it felt like he did. As he pondered that idea, John sank his body down to the ground, using the closed door as a back cover. What the hell was that noise? It sounded so violent and scary. Were there intruders on his grounds without him knowing? John just had to know. So that's when John took a few deep breaths. He decided to head back in. But he wouldn't do so unprepared. John got up from the ground and looked around for some protection. In the back, he saw a rusty pitchfork. Normally used for farming, but now it was his shielding weapon. He also spotted a flashlight that still had some life in it. With his weapon and a way to navigate these tunnels, he headed back into the pitch-black tunnel. At that moment, the scary sound disappeared again. And in front of him was nothing but dark silence. Just the sound of his feet treading carefully through the watery cave floor. John was walking for about 5 minutes now, and the safe door was already way behind him. These tunnels were long and ran deep into the mountain, that much was clear. And after a couple of turns, John saw something. Old rail tracks. Did this used to be a mine? It didn't take long for evidence to pop up to prove John's hypothesis. Because when he followed the tracks deeper into the tunnel, John spotted several rooms filled with old mining gear. They were old and dusty. Remnants of a harsher time. John decided to head inside and take a closer look. Fascinated, he stepped into one of the rooms to get a closer look at the gear. It was like the former workers had just gone up and left. Helmets and pickaxes were just resting against the wall. John wanted to pick one up, but he never got the chance. Because right before he did, he heard a chilling sound again. This sound was different from the two loud thumping noises he heard before. The volume easily matched it, but it was more of a loud roar, as if a huge animal was aware of his presence and wanted to scare him. John's body froze, but this time he did not run away. Instead, he left the miner's room and headed deeper inside of the tunnel. He wasn't going to be afraid this time. He wanted to know what made that sound and wanted to know the mysteries of this cave system. With his pitchfork at the ready, he ventured on. Shortly after, he heard the loud thumping noises again. John used his flashlight to point in the direction of the sound, trying not to get surprised by anything. The sound seemed to get closer, getting more distinct and articulate as John himself moved forward. Yet the volume of the sound got weaker as he did. Very weird, John thought. John mustered every bit of bravery in his body and kept walking, following the sound that became more and more frequent. It almost felt rhythmic, John thought. He was getting close, but then John was stopped in his tracks. He looked into the distance and saw two bright shimmers staring at him from the darkness. John squinted his eyes to see if he could pinpoint what was staring at him. But as fast as the shimmers appeared, they also seemed to vanish out of sight. John's nerves rose, and he could feel his heartbeat gaining momentum. What was that? Was it an animal? Was he in danger? John was now at a crossroads, both figuratively as well as literally. He was scared but wanted to move forward as well. But his search got a lot more complicated, because the tunnel was branching off into multiple smaller passageways, and that was not all. Because a few seconds after the eyes disappeared, John heard fast approaching footsteps. He tried to follow the sound of the footsteps. It was hard because, at first, it seemed like they were all around him. Whatever it was, it knew these tunnels well. And John was right in its territory. The footsteps stopped again, and as John peered left, he saw the shimmers again. These were definitely eyes. He turned his body to face whatever it was head on. John grabbed the handle of the pitchfork tightly with one hand and pointed it forward. With his other hand, he illuminated the tunnel in front of him. The silence was eventually broken by footsteps slowly creeping toward him. This was it. The moment of no return. John heard that the footsteps were no longer switching from tunnel to tunnel. That thing was coming straight for him now. But what is it? Was it a dangerous animal? Was there a person down here? John was about to find out. A figure emerged from the shadows as John tried to make himself look as menacing as possible. He jabbed with the pitchfork, trying to scare whatever came his way. But instead of a large bear or some other dangerous creature, a scrawny-looking man emerged from the darkness in front of him. The man looked old. John estimated that he was in his late 60s. But he could just as well be way off because the appearance of the man made him look even older than he probably was. Brown ripped-up clothing hung on his body, and his face was covered with long messy hair and a thick beard. For a moment, the two men stared at each other in total silence. It was like time stood still, and John could feel the sensation of his own swallowing out of nerve. But then the man broke that tension. With a loud voice, he shouted, "Help!" And immediately afterward, he jolted past John. The moment was like a blur to John, who was still frozen in place. He didn't have any time to use the pitchfork he brought for protection. Nor did he have the chance to answer the call for help. The man was already sprinting away in one of the tunnels. Do I follow? John thought. As John's eyes followed the man, he saw him disappear into the darkness once more. His footsteps were quick. He seemed to run with purpose. And that's when John decided to do the same. He dropped the pitchfork that only weighed him down and ran after the man. For an old man, he was lightning quick. John was at least 20 years younger than the old man he was chasing. But still, he had a hard time keeping up with his pace. John did his best to follow the quick footsteps that were heard in front of him. During his chase down of the man, John passed multiple rooms. They were even more impressive than the first one he stepped into. All of them were filled with mining gear, and all of them intrigued him. But he had no time to check them out. He had to keep up. As he ran, John's mind started to wander. Who is this man? Did he really live down here? Guessing from his appearance, it surely seemed like he did. And if so, was he here all this time? John lived on this property for 5 years already, but never knew he wasn't alone. His mind was racing, maybe even faster than his feet were at the moment. If the old man, in fact, was living on this property all this time, or even way before he got it, how was he getting food? It's not like you could grow a vegetable garden down here. And was this man the only one? John's head felt like it was about to explode. He never thought that his day would get this wild this quickly. But the most important and pressing question remained. Why did the man call out for help when he met me? Was there something wrong? Did he want me to follow him? The footsteps in the distance slowed down and eventually even stopped. And John noticed that he himself slowed down his steps as well. That's when John got pushed out of his crowded mind. A hard thumping sound brought him back to reality. It was the sound he heard before. And it was close this time. John made his way around a sharp corner in the tunnel, and that's when he saw it. A large wooden door was held up in a rusty metal door frame. So that's the sound he heard. It was the slamming of a door that echoed through the tunnel. John now stood still in front of the closed door. John's hand moved slowly towards the doorknob. The old man must have disappeared behind it. But John felt tension all over his body as his hand crept closer. Was he really going to do this? He had no idea what could be behind this door. His hand was now wrapped tightly around the knob. John hesitated to turn the knob sideways. This was his last chance to turn back. What if the man wasn't alone? What if this was all a trap to lure him here and attack him? John had already dropped his only defensive weapon when he started running. But even with all the doubt, he still turned the knob. The door opened up with a loud creak. As John stepped forward, the door fell into its lock behind him again, replicating the loud thumping sound from before. John couldn't believe what he was seeing. A large dome-shaped cave opened up before him. It had drawings on the walls, and a fire was going. The place was mesmerizing, and what surprised him the most was that a large mining lamp was hanging from the cave ceiling. It was burning, so that meant the electricity was routed towards this place. John looked around more and then saw a medium-sized dog lying on an old blanket. John stepped forward, trying to get the attention of the dog. It lay there motionless as if it was fast asleep. John tried to get its attention by making high-pitched noises and scratching the stone ground beneath his feet. But no response came from the dog. That's when John heard the man's voice coming from the shadows. John was startled for a moment as the man stepped out of a dark part of the cave. "Can you help him? Can you please help my dog?" the old man pleaded with a sad tone in his voice. John looked at the man and saw his tear-filled eyes looking at him. John was still half out of breath from the run and felt that his body was still filled with tension. He tried to calm himself by taking a few big breaths. When he finally felt his heart rate drop, he asked the man who he was and what he was doing here. The old looked up and started talking. The old man wiped away his tears as he passed John with slow footsteps. He told John that his name was Edgar and that he had now lived in this cave for about 10 years. It was just him. Well, him and his dog Tank, of course. He walked over to the dog to pet him. "I used to be a mine worker, way back when this town was still thriving on the coal mine industry. You could say that I know these tunnels by heart. But with other forms of energy getting more popular, this mine lost its purpose. People left, and I did so for a time as well. After the mine closed, I tried to live a normal life. But I couldn't hold a normal job. I was struggling to pay rent and got evicted. After a while, my family even alienated me. So I grabbed Tank, who was still a pup at the time, and went to the only place I knew and loved. This mine always was my home, and after I left town, it was again. Me and Tank lived in solitude for many years, and we did fine on our own. But good sir, now everything is going horribly wrong. You see, Tank is very sick and I can't help him. You have to help us. The man pointed at his dog. The old dog looked up and moaned in pain. The old man explained that he could not simply walk into a veterinarian's office. He would get ejected. John crouched down next to the man and his dog. He wanted to help but was confused about what to do. The old man dropped down to his knees and was by now crying his eyes out. Please, sir, I beg of you. Tank is all I have got. He is my one and only friend, and I can't just let him die here. The tears and the emotional plea of the old man struck a chord with John. John locked eyes with the man and put his hand on the poor man's shoulder. You are right, he cannot die like this. I will help you, John said. John formed his arms into a shovel and picked up the dog from the ground. He stood up and asked the old man to guide the way. The old man did not hesitate for one moment. He knew these tunnels like the back of his thumb, and he jolted off. John followed closely, all the while clutching the dog as tightly to his body as he possibly could. The tunnel system rushed past them, and before they knew it, they were at the shed. As they entered the shed, John placed the dog on a mattress that was standing against the southern wall of the building. John told the man to stay with the animal as he would make a call. He searched for the nearest veterinarian and dialed the number. The phone rang. A woman appeared on the other end of the line, and John explained the dire and unique circumstances they were in. At first, the vet on the line was hesitant. It almost sounded like a practical joke. But as John kept persisting, he finally convinced her to come over to his property. The vet told John that it would be about half an hour's drive before she could get there. John agreed but asked her to please hurry up. The dog was in bad shape and was breathing heavily. It was a sad sight, and the wait made both men very nervous. As they waited, the man explained to John in detail how much this dog meant to him. He went into isolation by choice, but that did mean that he wasn't extremely lonely. Tank is the only thing keeping me sane. I can't re-enter society anymore. So he is all I've got. It was heartbreaking to hear how this old man suffered in life. John was worried at first that a stranger lived on his property. But now he was happy that this cave had helped this poor man to find peace with his dog. But there was one thing that John didn't understand fully. How did you manage to survive down there for 10 years without ever surfacing? John asked. The old man smiled. He said that this property used to be just an abandoned mine. Not a single person lived here. So Edgar had free access to go in and out as he pleased. And he put that to good use. It took months of work. But Edgar managed to transport thousands upon thousands of food cans into the mine. His hoarding skills filled up the cave with cans of tomato soup and beans. All with an expiration date of over 20 years. After that, there was only one thing left to do. Edgar filled one small handcart with clothes and basic stuff for himself and the dog. And that's when he entered his new mine home permanently. He hardly got out. Sometimes he would sit in the shed and let the sun hit his face for a moment. But he never stayed long. But when Tank got sick, I had no choice. I had to go outside and seek help from the people who now lived on this property. I was just making plans to go outside when I heard someone walking in my tunnels. That's when I just knew I had to grab your attention. Edgar said, half crying. As John tried to comfort Edgar in his dire moments, he noticed the headlights of the veterinarian's car appearing in the distance. So John got up on his feet and ran out of the shed to grab her attention. A double honk of the horn meant that she saw them. The vet entered the building and examined the dog thoroughly. She told Edgar that Tank had a small wound on his hip, probably from scraping a sharp rock in the tunnel. It got infected, but after binding it up and giving Tank some antibiotics, he would be fine. There was only one problem. She told Edgar that it was not possible for Tank to re-enter the cave again. The environment down there was way too filthy for this dog to recover properly. It will surely get infected again if he goes back. Edgar understood but didn't know what else to do. It was heartbreaking to watch. The old man broke down in tears and sank to his knees. He looked at his poor dog and knew that the vet was right. But he didn't have any place else to live. This cave was his only sanctuary and normal society was just as scary. That's when John came to the rescue. John helped the old man back on his feet and told him that he might have the perfect solution. He promised Edgar that the both of them could stay in the shed until Tank recovered. It wasn't much, but it was dry and clean. Will this shed be a better place for recovery? John asked the vet. The vet nodded positively, and that was enough for John. He smiled as he held out his hand to shake Edgar's. Do you accept my offer? John asked. Edgar was blown away and seemed to be frozen in place. He couldn't believe this kindness. He looked at Tank on the ground and then he held out his own hand and thanked John for all his help. You have a good heart, sir, and God will reward you in the end, the old man said, smiling. The old man was happy that his dog had a safe place to recover. But that was not all John did. No, John had big plans, and they came to fruition a few weeks later. Because after about 2 weeks, Tank was fully recovered and ready to go back into their mine home. But John had a better idea. He offered to fully renovate the shed to a proper home. Edgar looked at John with big eyes. He couldn't believe it, but he knew not to question John. John was a man with a set mind. So a few months later the shed was turned into the cutest home. A warm and friendly place where Edgar and Tank now still live. They are happy and can honestly say that they have gained a true friend in John.